Hi guys, it's Miss Kerwin. I'm here with Kara Kerwin and Max Kerwin, and we're going to read you the story Disaster in Space. And yes, she's eating M&Ms. She wants to show you that. This is a true story. So this is nonfiction. Like, this actually happened. So the subtitle over here says the incredible true story of three astronauts fighting for survival 240,000 miles from Earth. The three astronauts of Apollo 13 were doomed. That's how it seemed on April 13th, 1970. Commander Jim Lovell and officers Fred Hayes and Jack Swigert were speeding through space when a violent explosion rocked their spacecraft. So guys, they're in a spaceship. They're up in the sky in the middle of nowhere, and there's an explosion. Dun, 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 right? The blast tore apart one side of their ship. Within minutes, half their oxygen supply had bled out, and the ship's power was draining fast. Guys, do you know what you need in order to breathe?
How?
Oxygen. Their oxygen is going away. They only have half of it. I'm so stressed out right now. Next page. I said next page. There it goes. All right, so without power and oxygen, the astronauts would soon suffocate, and they would be stranded in the forever blackness of space. Apollo 13 was supposed to be a research mission to the moon. Now it would be a fight for survival hundreds of thousands of miles from Earth.
I'm done because Maxwell took two of mine.
Okay, a mission to the moon.
No.
I'm not arguing on a video for my students. Thank you. 2 days earlier, Apollo 13 had blasted off from Florida's Kennedy Space Center. Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert were strapped inside their small spacecraft, which was perched atop a 360-foot-tall rocket packed with millions of pounds of explosive fuel. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. With a deafening roar and a brilliant flare of fiery gas, the rocket catapulted Apollo 13 into the sky. It streaked through the air at 24,000 miles per hour. Holy cow, that's fast. No. 14 times the speed of a bullet. The force strained the astronauts' hearts. It stretched back the skin on their faces until it seemed it would rip away from their skulls. The men felt that their bones could shatter, but this was normal. In fact, the launch was just about perfect. Soon the astronauts had left Earth. And I want to take a look down here. Oh, there's the rocket. See it blasting off with all the fire? And the astronauts are up in here. And then here are the astronauts from left to right. Jack Swigert, Jim Lovell, and Fred Hayes. Becoming an astronaut was highly competitive, with hundreds of people applying for just a few spots. America's first astronauts were all white men. Prejudice and discrimination kept women, African Americans, Latinos, and other groups out of many professions through the 1970s.
Who's going to drive it?
They're all kind of driving it together. Space exploration was one of them. Is that fair, guys? That you couldn't be an astronaut if you were a woman or you were African American? Or is that fair?
No.
No, it's not fair, Kara. Anyways, soon the astronauts had left Earth and were cruising towards their destination. Their mission was to land on the moon and explore a hilly section called Fra Mauro. The 240,000-mile journey would take 3 days, and it would not be a luxurious ride. The astronauts were crammed into Apollo 13's command module, a car-sized capsule named Odyssey. It was part cockpit, part sleeping cabin. Meals were pouches of dried food prepared by adding warm water and kneading it for 3 minutes. Does that sound yummy? Dried food in a packet? Ugh. There were no showers, no sinks, and no toilets. The astronauts urinated, that means peed, into bags and then released their urine into space through a hatch. Solid waste, that means poop, was sealed up in an odor-proof plastic bag to be brought back to Earth. Does this sound fun?
No. Yeah.
Peeing in a bag and eating out of a dried food packet. Ugh.
No.
And of course, there was no gravity to hold the astronauts or anything else down. So floating around in their jumpsuits, they look like big fish stuck in a tiny tank. So they're floating through the air because there's no gravity. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah.
But Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert were thrilled and honored to be part of this mission, and they were confident they would succeed. After all, they had a team of brilliant flight engineers supporting them back at Mission Control in Houston, Texas. Like hovering parents, these engineers monitored every detail of the flight, from the ship's position in space to each astronaut's heartbeat. The astronauts and mission control stayed in constant contact. 2 days into the journey, the mission seemed flawless. There was no sign of the catastrophe to come. Dun, dun, dun. And then here's appears the mission control. This is the room in Houston, Texas, that the engineers communicated with Apollo 13 astronauts and helped them get home. I know it. A space race. Only 15 years before the launch of Apollo 13. I'm reading, love. The idea of humans traveling through space was the stuff of science fiction. But by the early 1960s, both America and Russia were racing to be the first country to put a human in space. Leading America's efforts was a new government agency called the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. NASA hired hundreds of brilliant scientists and engineers. They perfected rockets powerful enough to blast into space, and they designed new aircraft. They began training astronauts, 20th century Christopher Columbuses, who would journey into the vast and uncharted frontier of space. The space program became a source of enormous pride to Americans, and there was no moment more triumphant than on July 20th, 1969, when American astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first human to walk on the moon. Can you imagine walking on the moon? So cool. Some 600 million people around the world tuned into the TV broadcast to witness Armstrong's boot making its mark on the moon's sandy surface. In the month after Armstrong's celebrated steps, however, something unexpected happened. Many Americans lost interest in space travel. After a decade with dozens of successful missions, space travel had become to seem rather ho-hum.
Mom.
That is, until 55 hours and 53 minutes into the Apollo 13 mission, when disaster struck. What? Is it about the article?
No.
I'm recording this for students. Can it wait?
It
cannot wait.
They cannot wait.
Can you wait to ask me the question that you need to ask?
Yeah. I
Thank
didn't
you.
ask any
A
question.
catastrophe. On April 13th, 1970, Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert were preparing for the moon landing, which was about a day away. To get to the moon's surface, they would use a second spacecraft, the Lunar Excursion Module, LEM. The LEM and Odyssey were latched together like Lego bricks. When Apollo 13 started to orbit the moon, the LEM would detach and be used as a shuttle to and from the moon's surface. The astronauts had just finished an inspection of the LEM when Mission Control asked them to perform a routine task. Turn on the fans inside the oxygen tanks. With a flip of a switch, Swigert completed the job. Seconds later, there was a loud bang. The spacecraft moaned and shuddered. Houston, we've had a problem, Lovell said. In fact, it was a catastrophe. At first, nobody knew what happened. Lovell suspected maybe a meteor had hit them, but actually faulty wiring in an oxygen tank had triggered an explosion. Yes, fire was everywhere on that part. The blast drained the spacecraft's power and sent the oxygen supply blowing into space. Put that down. Within hours, there would be no air left to breathe, and Odyssey would be dead. News of the accident spread around the world. Few believed the astronauts would survive, but aboard Apollo 13, there was no time for grim predictions. The three men knew rule number one in an emergency is to focus on the problem. Worry and panic do not get you closer to a solution. And so the astronauts got to work. Do you think they're going to survive, or do you think they're going to die?
I think they're going to survive.
What do you think?
I think they're going to die.
Oh, we got one vote on each side. Let's see. New problems. At Mission Control in Houston, Flight Director Gene Kranz gathered his engineers. These men knew Apollo's 13 systems better than they knew their own bedrooms. Now they would do everything in their power to bring the astronauts home. Soon, both Kranz's team and the astronauts would come up with the same idea, to use the LEM as a lifeboat. I know. Stay strong. The LEM had its own supply of power, oxygen, and water. The astronauts would climb through the hatch down to the LEM and stay there until they approached Earth. Then they would climb back into Odyssey for the final plunge through Earth's atmosphere, during which the ship would be superheated to 5,000 degrees in the thickening air. Unlike Odyssey, the LEM was not equipped with a heat shield. The astronauts attempted to enter the Earth's atmosphere in the LEM, they would be incinerated. That means lit into fire. The astronauts had barely settled into the LEM when a new problem cropped up. The journey home would take 4 days, but the LM didn't have enough power or water to last that long. So the astronauts turned off all but the most important system, including the heat. Outside, the temperature was 280 degrees below zero. Holy cow, that's cold. Soon the men were shivering, but the cold was the least of their worries. Every minute, it seemed, new problems arose. The ship kept drifting off course. The LEM's air filters stopped working, and the air became toxic with carbon dioxide. The gas humans exhale while they breathe. Holy cow, this does not look good.
What did they do again?
They're drifting off course. Their air filters aren't working. They're breathing in carbon dioxide and getting really, it makes you feel really sleepy and ugh, and then eventually you would die. With many systems damaged or powered down, the engineers had to use their ingenuity to find creative solutions. The days passed. The astronauts barely slept. Neither did the NASA engineers back on Earth. The LEM became cluttered with trash and full urine bags. Ew. That floated through the air. Meanwhile, on Earth, people crowded into churches to offer prayers for Apollo 13. Free fall to Earth. Apollo 13 approached Earth on the morning of Friday, April 17th. So are they even going to the moon anymore? No, they're like, holy cow, we might die. We're going back to Earth. The astronauts were about to face the most dangerous part of their journey. What if Odyssey's electrical system couldn't be powered up? What if Odyssey's heat shield had been damaged in the explosion? What if the parachutes had turned to blocks of ice and didn't open? Incredibly, the astronauts had no trouble powering up Odyssey. But what about the heat shield? If it failed, the ship would burn up. The world would know the fate of Apollo 13 in 4 minutes. That's how long communication with Odyssey would be blacked out as it fell to Earth. Gentlemen, Lovell said, we're about to re-enter. I suggest you get ready for a ride. The men tightened their seatbelts as Odyssey began its 25,000 mile per hour free fall to Earth. Through the small windows, all they could see was fiery red. At Mission Control, the command room was packed with engineers and visitors. Nobody spoke. The room was completely silent. The minutes ticked by in agonizing slowness. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. NASA's Joe Kerwin, his name's Kerwin, tried to make contact. Odyssey, Houston standing by, over. Nothing. Try again, Kranz barked. Odyssey, Houston standing by, over. Still nothing. 5 minutes. Some engineers fought back tears. Then a voice crackled over the radio. Okay, Joe, said Swigert. At Mission Control, joy and relief flooded the entire room. Kranz pumped his fist. Inside Odyssey, Lovell, Hayes, and Swigert watched the sky outside the windows turn from angry red to soft pink and finally to blue. Their speed slowed as the air thickened. Pop! Odyssey's parachutes opened. The ship floated down to Earth feather-like, and it came to rest in the warm waters of the Pacific Ocean. The Apollo 13 mission was over, a failed mission that would go down in history as one of NASA's greatest successes. Lovell looked at Hayes and Swigert. Fellows, he said, we're home.
I knew
They lived! And then down here it says the landing. The Apollo 13 astronauts, a moment after landing in the Pacific Ocean. Note how small the command module is. Look how tiny it is. It's like the size of a little car. They just stay in there together. Wow, crazy true story.
I thought they were going to be dead.
I know. I was afraid they were going to die too, but they
I literally
survived.
read this and then you said.
You read ahead.
Uh-huh.
You sneaky little monkey.